You see all of this right here, this is going to be my new filming location. But I can't film. Do you want to know why? Because of school. Which isn't really that bad. It's actually a pretty good school. Anyway, since I can't film with models right now and I still need something to keep you guys entertained like every month while you wait for Spectres of Sodor, I thought, this would be a good time to talk about my favorite episodes of Thomas and Friends. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And also, this is my opinion. These are my personal favorite episodes of Thomas and Friends, not the best episodes of the entire series. And if you disagree with one I put on the list, that's fine. We all have the right to our own opinions. Yes, you heard me. We all have the right to have opinions that are not identical to the Unlucky Tugs, okay? Out of the way, let's get started. Oh yeah, I took out my batteries. First episode on this list needs no introduction. You all know it, you all love it, it's the Flying Kipper. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't say I loved this episode as a child. This episode is a masterpiece. The sets are beautiful considering this was only season 1, Henry's character arc being completed is amazing, and it's just overall a masterpiece. Now, this episode's already been talked about to death, so I'm gonna keep it brief. The small details like that car on screen right now that swerved across the road, and all the bushes in this shot just make it look so real and look like something out of a dreamland. And I can't tell you how many times I would remake this episode with my wooden trains. In fact, I took stuffing out of a pillow just so Henry would have snow to fall onto. Now, sadly, there is a reason why this episode is so low on this list. While I do love it, I feel like the ending falls a little flat. It's still great, Henry getting his new shape is wonderful to see, but it's spring when Henry comes back, and everything's back to normal season 1. Imagine if it was still snowing when Henry came back. Imagine if it took them a whole year just to rebuild him. That would make it feel so much more real, and it would feel like a magical Christmas adventure, like Henry got the best gift ever. But what we got was fine. The music score is incredible, and they took out the Coco gag from the crash, and that was really clever considering how tragic the situation was. And not to mention, Henry does look really good in his new shape. But if only it had been snowing, he would have stood out a little more. Anyway, before we move on to number 9, I just want to apologize for, like, all the audio errors and, like, sounds in the background. That's all because of this guy. Your nails. They make noise when you move. You want to apologize for that? I have to look after you, and I have to film this video at the same time. You gonna be quiet for me? Or are you just gonna keep walking around looking for food? Huh? 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 Yeah, you're just gonna keep looking for food, aren't you? Anyway, back to the episodes. Okay, I know I'm gonna get a lot of complaints for putting this episode, an episode from season 8, above the best season 1 episode, but this is my personal favorite episodes, not the best of the entire show, so hear me out. The reason why I put this above Flying Kipper is because this episode doesn't have a letdown moment in my opinion. Both Gordon and Percy are very much in character. We see that jerky side of Percy when Gordon starts making him annoyed, and Gordon is in character too. He's just Gordon like he always is. And it makes sense for him to be the main character of this episode. It just wouldn't work with someone else. If this was like, oh, I don't know, James, it would probably just be an annoying episode. But no, Gordon and Percy seems like the right pair up for this episode. Percy hasn't pulled passengers in a long time, they say in this episode. And that makes sense. Percy always got caught up with the dirty work, freight cars. So it makes sense for him to be nervous about pulling passengers. Sure, he did once or twice in the classic series, but we've seen Percy bump trucks so many times in the classic series, which makes sense because he's portrayed as an industrial engine then. Again, he has pulled passengers once or twice, but he doesn't have Annie and Clarabelle like Thomas does to keep him on track with passengers. So it makes sense why he'd be so bouncy and eager with passengers. And I can kind of relate to Percy here. Like, I get that some teachers have to be harsh because that's the way they get kids to listen, but some are a little too harsh. I'm not pointing any fingers here, but I had a few harsh teachers growing up, and when I finally learned how to do the things they were teaching the right way, they would say that my way was the wrong way and theirs was the right way. Basically like Duck from CGI. it gets kind of irritating, and while there is more than one way to do things, others might view their way as the only right way, and you can really feel Percy's anger in this episode because I know I found myself in places like that growing up. Not to mention, they keep the fantastic legacy of Gordon crashes going.
Yuck! Coughed Gordon.
I don't understand why nobody finds that funny. Anyway, the main reason why I put this above Flying Kipper is I'm able to relate to it a lot more, and I like what they were trying to teach. There is more than one way to do things, and teachers and parents should remember this when teaching their kids how to do things. While it is important to teach them and influence them, they might have their own way of getting something done, and as long as it does get it done, it's fine. Which is something that is extremely overlooked in today's society, in my opinion. So, that's why I put this above Flying Kipper. Gordon takes charge at the snowy countryside throughout the whole episode, and overall, it feels more complete in my opinion. While Flying Kipper definitely wins visual-wise, I think this story wins moral-wise. While it is important to never give up in hard times, it's also important to lead others correctly.
Did you see how smoothly I puffed? Asked Percy.
Yes, said Gordon, you have learned very well. But then again, Gordon added, I am a very good teacher.
Lo and behold, a CGI episode made it onto my top 10 list. Why? Because this episode is awesome. Basically, what this episode is about is Thomas is taking Annie and Clarabelle on his branch line, but they keep complaining that he's going too fast. So Thomas decides to be rude to them, and he decides to change his speed every time they start complaining. He goes too slow one time, too fast another, and so on, so on, so on. However, Thomas gets so carried away with teasing them that he ends up being late for his next job. Karma! Anyway, after this, Thomas is so caught up in trying to make up for lost time that he just casually leaves Annie and Clarabelle in the shunting yard. He rushes off to his next job, does it, and then comes back for his next train. So far, this seems like a pretty boring episode, but wait, this is where things get interesting. There's a mix-up at the shunting yard, and some maniac accidentally shunts Annie and Clarabelle up to streamlined coaches, and shunts them over to Caitlin, a streamlined mainline engine. And Annie and Clarabelle were so tired that they didn't recognize the mistake at first. It wasn't until Thomas appeared behind them that they noticed the mistake.
Fizzling fireboxes! Wait, Caitlin! Come back!
Now this episode is before Marvelous Machinery, so Thomas's top speed is nothing compared to Caitlin's, and so to Annie and Clarabelle it seems like they're traveling at the speed of light! And Caitlin has no idea that Annie and Clarabelle are at the back of her train because she's so focused on racing her friend. And not to mention, when Thomas fails for a second time to catch Annie and Clarabelle, he's becoming even more stressed. And all of a sudden, Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle are all regretting the things that they did and said.
I'll never complain about Thomas again! Nor will I!
If I ever get Annie and Clarabelle back, I'll never tease them again!
But Thomas misses Caitlin again, and I think this is where the story gets really intense, because Caitlin is heading over to the mainland, aka the other railway, where steam engines that aren't useful anymore are scrapped. But not just the steam engines are scrapped, the old rolling stock is scrapped too, and Annie and Clarabelle are old rolling stock. So if they were found on the mainland with no owner, they would most likely be cut up. Okay, they never flat out say that in the episode, but I've got a feeling it's what Thomas was thinking.
Oh no!
Thomas had to stop Caitlin before she went over the Vickerstown Bridge to the mainland.
Unfortunately, Thomas fails. When he finally reaches the bridge, Annie, Clarabelle, and Caitlin are gone, nowhere to be seen. And just when it looks like all hope is lost, the bridge lowers, and...
It's a good thing I've stopped Caitlin. She was taking your coaches away.
Annie and Clarabelle!
Thank you, hero. Thank you indeed. indeed.
And this episode has a happy ending, just like all the other CGI episodes. Thomas apologizes to Annie and Clarabelle for being cheeky, and Annie and Clarabelle apologize for being so rude to Thomas. And they say that from that point on, they wouldn't do those things to each other again. Of course they don't stick to this because the CGI series is never consistent. But who knows? Maybe this episode takes place at the end of the timeline. It is never mentioned once. However, Charlie never speaks again, so we don't know if he changed his ways or not. I'll let you guys decide on that.
Too right.
Now, the only thing I have left to say about Not So Slow Coaches is, please give it more respect. I know my theory about Annie and Clarabelle going to the mainland probably isn't true, but it's still a really fun watch. In my opinion, Scaredy Engines is an episode that doesn't get talked about enough, because a lot of elements in the episode are bone-chilling. Maybe Edward's story isn't complete, and it does take a lot of elements from Ghost Train, but I still really like it. And I actually kind of like that the story isn't completed, because we need to make our own conclusions about what happened in the story about this engine who lost their whistle. And some people say that Sir Topham is a jerk just because he sends Thomas, Percy, and Duck to the smelter's yard on Halloween. But guys, remember this is a railway. We can't just close the railway because of a fun holiday. So I think Sir Topham is completely justified in this episode. And I'll admit, Thomas is a bit out of character considering his character arc in Season 5, but I don't know, maybe this episode takes place before that because none of the Season 6 characters appear in it. Ugh, just look at these shots. Look at that claw that looks like it's about to grab Percy. This episode isn't talked about enough. Like, there's smoke everywhere, like, there's literally buckets of lava hanging from the ceiling. And this anchor here, why the flip is there an anchor on the ceiling? It's just so eerie. Oh yeah, another thing. I feel like this is the second to only episode of Season 6 where Alec Baldwin 100% nails the narration and does it better than Michael Angelis. No offense to either of them. Alec Baldwin did go through a lot during the time of Season 6, and Michael Angelis is great too, but I feel like Alec Baldwin did better because Michael Angelis just made it seem like, oh no, I'm scared of ghosts.
There's no such things as ghosts, he said nervously. Who's there?
But Alec Baldwin, on the other hand, does the narration in a very slow and eerie way until we hear the whistle. It's almost like it's a horror movie and like something's just gonna come out of nowhere and just jump scare Thomas. Like, this adds more intense to the story and we have no idea what's gonna happen.
There's no such thing as ghosts, he said nervously. Who's there?
Another reason I love this episode is because the scene where Thomas is all alone in the building feels like something out of a child's nightmare. They mention so many times in the show that there's a possibility that the engines would be scrapped if not under the right ownership. And this looks like something out of a child's nightmare. Thomas, all alone, in the scrapyard, with no one around. And there's just shadows everywhere, like something's just gonna come and get him. This shot right here of Thomas just moving into the red glow as if the smelting pit's right behind him. Like, it's just so eerie. And of course, we don't see the smelting pit. We have no idea where it is, but again, Thomas is all alone. Like that claw's just gonna come down, take him away from Sodor forever. It's not sugar-coated one bit. And not to mention the whistle. We have no idea how the whistle was set off. Did Duck set up the whistle to prank Thomas? Was Edward's story real and the ghost was trying to come in contact with his whistle? Or was the whistle just in Thomas's imagination? They never say.
It was naughty of Thomas to tease you, Percy, said Duck. He was only playing, said Percy. I hope he hurries up. I wouldn't want him to be late for the fireworks. He's after me! I don't think he'll be late, said Duck.
What are you hiding, Duck? This episode might not be as scary as episodes like Duncan Gets Spooked or Rusty in the Boulder, but for me, the reason why I put this on the list instead of one of those two is because it feels more complete in my opinion. It still has the mystery element there, but the story is tied together a lot better. And Thomas and Percy making amends in the end is really nice. It shows that Thomas's character development is still kinda there, and it also shows why these two are friends. They do deeply care for each other. Also, how can you go wrong with a shot like this? It's been 10 years since I first watched a video in the Thomas fandom. In that entire 10 years, I have only seen a handful of people talk about this episode. Salty's Stormy tale is extremely underrated. Why? Because it does another one of those interesting scenarios where both sides are technically in the wrong. Thomas and Percy think that Salty is grand, so they decide to copy him because they look up to him. But Salty takes this the wrong way and thinks that they're just making fun of him like someone on TikTok. And you can't really blame him for this. Like, I wouldn't like it if somebody was making fun of me. And while I don't let it affect me personally, there are still a lot of people who struggle with this. And also, Emily in this episode is great because she's a role model. She stands up to Thomas and Percy and tells them off for teasing Salty. Or at least that's what she thinks they did. And this is really nice considering that we're about to transition into the season where Emily becomes rather impatient. So it's nice to see her nice personality again. And that's also why I have a soft spot for What's the Matter with Henry. But that's not on the list, don't worry. Anyway, Thomas's character development is also still here because after hearing that he hurt Salty's feelings, he doesn't try to make excuses. He immediately admits that he and Percy were in the wrong.
We'll say sorry to him, added Thomas.
No way I'm talking about this episode without mentioning the storm scene. Look at these breathtaking shots. Like, seriously. I know I'm not the first person to ask this, but how did they get the boat to rock? I wonder if they just had it like on a seesaw or something. We may never know. The generator burning out, the light in the lighthouse itself, everything about this episode is just icing on the cake. Not to mention, the captain actually jump scared me as a kid.
Just in time! Hard to starboard, matey!
Was I the only one who was jump scared by that? Anyway, everything about this episode is great. Salty, Thomas, and Percy's friendship, Emily was great. Fergus doing all the work was pretty funny, and I like that they used him for something other than doing it right. So, I think this is a must-watch episode. Great visuals, great story, and overall, a really fun watch. Best episode of Season 7, hands down.
We're sorry. Then say no more, me hearties, replied Salty happily.
Unfortunately, I have to cut this video here because it's getting a little long and I don't have as much time to make videos now that I'm in high school. So I'm going to cut this video here and I'm going to come back with a part 2 another day. So I hope you all enjoyed and I have nothing else to say but goodbye everyone.